Food poisoning. It's absolutely one of the worst feelings of sickness that you can experience as a human being. I'm sure everyone who's ever gone through it can relate and will agree with me when I say it's a miserable time from start to finish, and the aftermath of the experience lingers on in your mind. I know I'm describing it like a veteran that's recalling their time in Vietnam with a 1,000 yard stare and all, but the feelings of stress that you get from both probably aren't that far off, I'd argue. And if you couldn't guess from that intro there, today's story is going to be about the time that I got food poisoning from Carl's Jr., of all places. You'd think Burger King would have been the culprit in this unfortunate disaster, but unfortunately, no, it was indeed Carl's Jr., and I know this for a fact because it was the only thing that I'd eaten on that fateful day. Now, I really want to set the stage here to help establish the timeline of events that transpired when this whole thing went down. I'm fairly certain it was around, I want to say 15 years ago, that I'd eaten this godforsaken burger from Carl's Jr., because I wasn't even the tender age of 10 yet when I'd gone through this whole food poisoning catastrophe. I wasn't even in 4th grade at the time, and yet there's an entire boxing match that's just taking place in my colon. So, as a prepubescent youngling who was ignorant of the sinister dangers of the world, I obviously didn't know what was happening to me at the time. Nor did I really understand this terrible aching pain that was occurring in my own stomach. Now, you may think I'm exaggerating it quite a bit, but foodborne illness is nothing to scoff at. It's a very dangerous thing to tackle, especially as a child in their growing years of life. I was just completely bedridden for the entire duration of me going through this food poisoning, and I ended up missing an entire week of school as a result. And, as someone who once proudly wore the crown of King of the Court when it came to tetherball, missing even a day, let alone a whole week of defending my title, is huge for me. Now, all jokes aside, I really was down bad that week. My entire existence at that time was just one of living and breathing in Spain with a silent S. It was like that scene at the end of Deathly Hallows Part 2 where Harry goes to that train station in Wizard Heaven or whatever, and he looks under the bench and sees Voldemort's shriveled and burned up fetus just laying under it, groaning for all of eternity. That was practically me for those 10 days of bed rest because I didn't want to move. I didn't want to eat. I didn't even want to exist on the same spiritual plane as my physical body at that time. But fortunately for me, the genetic structure of my body was able to adapt and fight off this sickness sent straight from hell, with the aid of an entire drugstore supply of Pepto-Bismol, mind you. But I did overcome this obstacle and proved yet again to both myself and my peers around me that I was indeed just truly built different, and that not even poisonous bacteria could kill me. And as that dark cloud looming over my head passed on to another poor victim, I woke up to see the sunshine and was able to once again smile on a grateful universe. Now, let's fast forward to the current me. It's 15 years later, and I've been completely devoid of consuming anything Carl's Jr. related. But as a result of me surviving this sick child experimentation that was stealthily conducted on me by that burger, I developed an irrational aversion to anything regarding them or their products, and it reached a point where by the time I was in high school and had freshly obtained my driver's license, I would unconsciously take detours on different streets to avoid any Carl's Jr. establishments within like a 2 mile radius of my body. I really treated Carl's Jr. like it was kryptonite to me. I swear, I had this demented mindset where I thought that anything with Carl's Jr.'s name on it would exude this aura of food poisoning, and that if I got even remotely close to it, I would just collapse and fall over like Superman. And, God forbid that there was a Carl's Jr. within my line of sight on the way to a party or something, and I had people in the car with me, because the people that knew me were painfully aware that I would flip that steering wheel around and we would find a different route, a non-Carl's Jr. infested route. But unfortunately, all good things come to an end as we reach the climax of this story, and as I previously established, I was on a 15+ year streak of sobriety from Carl's Jr. and their poison, the key word here being was. As of 3 days ago, at the time of me recording this anyway, I begrudgingly consumed a burger from Carl's Jr. once again, as a form of sustenance, if you can even call it that. Now, this whole experience was only amplified to pretty much being a dagger in the heart because it was executed by my own mother, of all people. The very woman who brought me into this world was now trying to remove me from it. Slowly, painfully, and ironically, because my mother is the type of woman who would take a blowtorch to a steak if she felt it was even remotely undercooked. But, in hindsight, I was able to deduce that she'd likely just forgotten that it was them and their devilish delights that gave me food poisoning in the first place, just because it had been so long, obviously. So you can imagine my shocking surprise when a DoorDash delivery shows up to my front doorstep, courtesy of my mother, and the moment I open my door to see the driver, I look him dead in the face. He hands me the bag, I turn it to the side, and I see the Carl's Jr. logo on it. And at that moment, I felt my eyes dilate. And God forbid he didn't accidentally say some goofy catchphrase like charbroiled burger for delivery or something, because to me those would have just been code words and activated me like the Winter Soldier, and I would have just attacked him right then and there on sight as a survival instinct to preserve my own well-being. Now, as I get a grip over myself and snap back to reality here, I come to terms with the fact that this is indeed a fresh burger from one of the 9 rings of hell, Carl's Jr., personally delivered from one of Lucifer's messengers. And I'm not the kind of wasteful person to just dump fresh and debatably edible food that was cooked and delivered specifically to me. So, as I process this whole disaster that's unfolding before me, I think to myself, alright, it's been over 15 years, I think I've lived a decent life, and if I end up dropping to the floor now, then at least I can haunt the CEO of Carl's Jr. and his entire family for the rest of his days. So, I unwrap the burger, take a good look at it, and then close my eyes to develop just enough mental fortitude to handle this next part. I take a giant bite out of this sandwich, and as I'm chewing away at this thing, I can see just my hands trembling as I'm slowly overcoming this obstacle that's once again confronted me in my weakest hour. I didn't cry or anything, but it was definitely tough to chew away at this damn thing. And as I finish the burger, I think to myself, damn, that beef was dry as hell. And then I went and grabbed a glass of water to wash away all the trauma. And I'd also decided that it was the only thing that I was going to eat that day, for the sake of ensuring that if I did indeed succumb to food poisoning, the coroners and CSI would be able to deduce this and immediately apprehend the culprits and promptly execute them. And now I sit here before all of you, 72 hours later, and it's safe to say that the burger didn't kill me then, and it still hasn't killed me now. But who knows, maybe they refined the recipe to activate 4 days later instead. Like those drugs in Wolf of Wall Street that were just so goddamn old they developed a delayed fuse. But realistically speaking here, I think I've managed to successfully navigate this storm, and having done so, I've learned, or rather, I've been reminded of some wise words once spoken by a bald, purple scrotum chin titan, that I can, dread it, run from it, destiny's still going to arrive all the same. And it just happened to be that my destiny on that day was the Monster Angus Steak Burger from Carl's Jr. Now, truly, this entire experience has enlightened me to how deeply damaged my psyche really was, all from a single bout of food poisoning that I went through. And now, being able to reflect on it as a fully grown adult, I think I can move past this entire thing and just accept that there are powers at work beyond our control and that mistakes really do just happen. So I will formally say this now on camera. Carl's Jr., I forgive you for not killing me as a kid. I'm sure your scientists tried their damnedest to put me in a mini-sized coffin 6 feet under when my age was still in the single digits. but unfortunately for them, they just couldn't account for my superior genetics and my mental fortitude to reclaim my throne on that tetherball court. So as we reach the end here, I want to personally thank you, the viewer, for having taken time out of your busy day to listen to this goofy story of mine, and hopefully many more stories to come as I develop confidence in sharing more about myself. Now, I'm sure many of you who've experienced food poisoning have your own unique stories, and if you'd like to share them in the comments below, I'd be more than happy to read each and every one of them. You can also message me your stories privately on my Twitter at Yotsuba_X, where I pull some of my video topics from. Today's story was actually just a recommendation from a friend. I told him what happened and he sort of just nudged me into making it into a video, so I figured, oh, what the hell, why not? But if you'd also like to keep up to date on any of my upcoming content, feel free to subscribe and click the bell to get any notifications of whenever I upload anything here on YouTube or when I live stream anything that I'm playing at the moment, as well as the occasional just chatting sessions that I'll try to be hosting in the future. Thanks again for watching, and until next time.